Hi, so welcome to our discussion. We're going to be talking about some of our experiences as students, especially relating to marginalized identities in Core 1. So to start out, we're going to ask you to share your name, your pronouns, and how you identify.
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. Hello, I'm Tony. I use she, her pronouns. And I identify as a cis woman, as bisexual, as polyamorous, and as able bodied and neurodivergent. I guess that's kind of the same thing. Oh, yeah, and Jewish.
Hi, I'm Shreya. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as bisexual, neurodivergent, Indian American, and a cis woman. And yeah.
Hi, I'm Amaya. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as bi, mixed race, chronically ill, cis woman, Christian.
Hi, I'm Avalon. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as Black, Jewish, and cisgender woman.
Hi, I'm Eleanor. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a cis woman. I'm an atheist, and I'm white. Yeah.
Okay, so our first question is, what was your experience like in core? And in your experience, how inclusive was the core curriculum for marginalized groups?
Another loaded question. I mean, my experience with core was fine. I'm not one of the people who's like, oh my God, core was so amazing and all of this. And because I'd done a kind of similar class in high school, so it wasn't like that new to me. And I don't know. Okay. While I was in core, I was like, oh, this is such a cool thing and we're learning so much. And then in hindsight, I was like, oh, this was built for white people. So thinking back on it, I feel like core kind of was meant to function as like intro to colonialism and all the reasons society is bad. But it didn't do that very well. Like it felt very much kind of a watered down version. And we got to kind of sample all of the isms, if that makes sense. Like based on the selections of reading, we talked about ableism, kind of, and we talked about racism, kind of, and we talked about colonialism, just a little bit. And I think it did kind of depend on the professor that you had and what their area of expertise was. Like my class focused a lot more on like what was the book? It was the one with the red cover and the white
Benedict
birds on
Anderson?
it. Do not say those words to me ever.
Agreed.
Anytime anyone says the word community to me, I'm just like, shut up, get out, you're done, go away from me, because that's what core does. To Kill a Mockingbird. We focused a lot on To Kill a Mockingbird and the implications of that with slavery, because that was my professor's area of expertise, like early American literature.
Did we read that in community?
Was it not To Kill a Mockingbird? I don't know. It was something
Was it
similar
Virginia
to
Woolf?
that.
Or
oh,
Kincaid.
Jamaica
Yeah.
Kincaid?
Yeah.
I think it was Kincaid. I don't know. Either way, the point is, we focused a lot on like the early American literature stuff because that was his area of expertise. And I think from that, we got a great look at like, this is slavery and this was why it's bad. And but we weren't able to focus on a lot of the other really important issues that core was trying to introduce us to. And while I do think like its function is good because like, you know, as a cis white able-bodied woman, there's a lot of isms that I haven't had personal experience with. The problem with that is if you build a program around introducing white students to all of the reasons that society functions for them and against other people, you are then excluding all of the other people from that. And like, it just kind of leaves me with a nasty feeling in my mouth. And especially, we talked a little bit about like gay stuff and homophobia, but it didn't relate to my personal experience. And I think that's an opinion I've heard shared a lot, is like, oh, we talked about a lot of concepts in an abstract sense. It's like, this is why racism is bad and why colonialism is bad. But we didn't talk about like everyone's personal experience. And I think some professors did more than others. But I don't want to say like it was a whitewashed experience, because it wasn't, but like it was all kind
Like
of very
white-centered?
watered down. Yeah, white centered.
Okay.
And it was very like watered down versions, which, and I'm repeating myself here, but like if you're doing this for a white audience and for white students to be introduced to this stuff, it makes sense not to just dive into the deep end, but that's assuming all that your students are white. So yeah, and there's something to be said for which professors were prepared to talk about which subjects. Like, I really wish I'd been in, I'm not saying this because Kim Drake is going to see this. However, I do really wish that I'd been in Kim Drake's core, because I think reading Good Kings, Bad Kings with Kim Drake would have just been a fantastic experience. But that said, doing a different ism every week means that you don't get to talk about the things that actually matter in your own personal experiences, and it doesn't really foster a sense of class community, I guess, when everyone is reading the same books and same stuff, but everyone is having different conversations about them. I feel like it doesn't really everyone was kind of supposed to have like the same ideas about each book, if that makes any sense. And especially with the lectures, it's like, oh, we all come together and listen to one person's opinion on this reading and what it means, and then we're all supposed to think that. I feel like it didn't leave a lot of room for our own interpretations. Now, granted, I slept through most of the lectures, but it, you know, it just doesn't, I guess it doesn't relate to personal experience, which can be very alienating for marginalized groups. And in my own identities, I definitely felt that, because it's like, I don't get to talk about how I feel. I get to listen to all the other cishet white kids being like, oh my God, I didn't know homophobia existed. And like, not in that exact way, but that's kind of the feeling I have. And the more I look back on specifically core 1, I think core 2 and core 3 did a better job, but specifically core 1, I'm like, wow, this wasn't for me, was it? At least not entirely. So yeah, that's the beginnings. That's my answer to that question.
Yeah, I think I have a similar perspective, because I think I got pretty lucky with my core experience, and I liked my discussion group, but core as a whole, I also I think I had similar issues with it, because it's like, you know, there were some weeks where I really enjoyed the readings, and I really felt like we had good discussions. And then there were some weeks where we didn't. And like, the issue was that we tried to cram so many different topics into one class. And then we can have like, we had 2 discussion days for each reading, I think, like 2 discussions in one lecture, which didn't give us a whole lot of time to really delve into it. And then it just ended up being like, yeah, just like intro to racism and colonialism and like all these bad things for the students who haven't learned about it already, which on the one hand is a good thing, like, because yes, they should be learning about it, but also having a program that centers the white students or like the privileged students is not the way, like it doesn't, like that does more harm than good. And then I feel like a lot of what we discussed was very abstract and very, like, it was discussed in a manner that was very theoretical, very abstract. And I feel like I would like to have seen more ways of, rather than just saying, oh, these terrible world issues exist, talking about like practical applications of like how they apply to students' lives and what we should be thinking about in regard to our own lives and our own work and like how we interact with people. Because I feel like there were some things where I wasn't sure if it was Core 1 or my Writing 50 class where we read A Small Place. Did we read that in Core?
I think that was core.
Was that Virginia Woolf?
That was Jamaica Kincaid.
Jamaica
Yeah,
Kincaid.
yeah, that was, yeah.
Like, I feel like that was something that I really enjoyed reading, and it's all about the problems with tourism and like how tourism can like and like exploitation of small countries and their communities based on tourism, which is like a really interesting thing to read about. But then I also know that a lot of the students in like at the 5Cs are the same people that those readings are talking about, because like a lot of people are very class privileged and like have the means to go on these vacations to these places all the time. And it's like once that class is over, I feel like people just stop thinking about it, and Core doesn't really put in the like the framework for people to continue thinking about that after it's over.
I think you've also talked about in-class applications instead of being very theoretical with this, where, you know, when we're very theoretical, a lot of the times, like some of these issues, we act like, oh, that was in the past and that's not really happening anymore. Like, you know, we had this reading, oh, what was that book where we were talking about disability? And it was like in the 70s, and it was talking about like the awful treatment in these different care homes.
Good Kings,
That was
Bad
Good
Kings?
Kings, Bad Kings.
Oh, yeah. And you know, like it did take place in the 70s, and I think it was written around that time, so that makes sense. But we kind of acted like we didn't really talk about how that is happening now, or really with any of the readings.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when we look at how professors can apply these readings to beyond the theoretical with the framework that's already in place, it seems to either be we make students do emotional labor, like marginalized students do emotional labor for the benefit of the white students in the class, like we were talking about. Or this was from my core too, but I remember my professor said, you know, we're at Scripps, so we're like existing in a place where we don't have to deal, where POC students don't have to deal with racism, and we can talk about it in these theoretical ways. And I was like, racism still exists here. Like we are definitely in a bit of a liberal bubble, but we're not totally separate from all of these, like we were saying, these isms that we're discussing in our classes. And even if we were in a like post-racial utopia being at Scripps, you know, there's still your past experiences and the things that you would be going forward to in the future. But even then, we're not at that post-racial paradise that they seem to think Scripps is. Or also anti-Semitism on campus. Did we have any readings on in truth or in community any readings addressing anti-Semitism?
Not that I remember. I feel like the car was so long ago and I didn't even do the reading. That's a lie. Don't tell Kim Drake that.
This is being recorded.
Just edit that out. Anyway, I believe one of the authors was like half Jewish. It's like one of my professors mentioned, like, oh, this author was Jewish, and that means this
Oh, it
affected
was
his
the
writing somehow.
Primo Levi reading, I think.
Levi, yes.
Which one was that?
Which book was that?
That was the periodic table, the life of a carbon
Right.
atom.
Yes, and
Oh,
what that
and
whole
that one was weird. Where we were following the life of a carbon. What did that have to do with community? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I don't really remember. That was a weird week. It's something to do with like communities everywhere. I don't know. The theme of community also just was bad because I feel like I know what they were trying to do. They'd be like, we are all one big community here and we all have our differences and like society sucks, but we're a community. And I was like, no, we're not. You made a class about community to show the white people that are like, the world is bad.
To the word community.
Yeah, like
not a good
whenever anyone says community, even if it's like, oh, this community home, I'm like, no, go away. So that's fun. But back to the anti-Semitism thing. We offhandedly talked about Levi. And I remember being like, oh, this was his experience directly with his family in the Holocaust, but we only talked about it in terms of like World War II. We never talked about like, oh, hey, anti-Semitism still exists.
And it's big on campus.
Big on campus. But we never talk about or address that in any way because World War II is over and the Allies won, so therefore anti-Semitism doesn't exist, I guess. Which is fun. So yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Amaya, with a lot of it, and Treya also, it feels very theoretical and very in the past. Very few of our readings were set, I don't think actually any of our readings were set in the present, except for like the Solnit piece about mansplaining, which was fantastic. I love Rebecca Solnit. But the point is, looking at things, and I'm just going to say isms here because there's a lot of them, and phobias, I guess. We're talking about like homophobia, transphobia, etc. Also, we didn't really talk about transphobia, which I didn't like because we should talk about that more. Just like as a concept. Anyway, point is.
Yeah, and considering we have so many different gender identities on campus,
right?
We should address that.
We really should. But transphobia wasn't, I'm not gonna say it's not as much of a thing, but it was a very different beast in the 70s than it is today. And if we're talking about everything, I don't think any of our readings were set before the 70s. And like the world that we've experienced is very different than the world that our professors have experienced, and that the readings are telling us that society has experienced, which just kind of leads to this disconnect. Because specifically, if you're teaching the white student body about how the world in the 70s is bad, but you're not relating that to today and being like, oh, hey, these things still exist and you need to be conscious of them. Baby Grace!
Hello, Grace.
Sorry. Hi, I love you. But if we're not talking about that, hi. Hello. But if we're not talking about that in a present situation and not reinforcing, like, you know, we all had the disclaimers at the beginning of the thing. It's like, oh, this is a safe space and we need to be mindful of the other students' experiences and like always talking with I statements and stuff. And yes, that's useful, but they always say we just need to be conscious. They never say what we need to be conscious of. And I think that really shows.
And even then, like, the professors, most of them aren't trained or have that experience knowing how to lead those discussions. So it's like, yes, we should be conscious, but they don't always know, like, you know, sometimes our conversation gets into a weird place or a place where there is a lot of potential for harm. And they don't really know how to get us to a space of like, I don't want to say get us away from that, because sometimes they will be like, okay, we're going to talk about something else, but the harm is still done. So maybe like a place of healing, or at least understanding and making that like a teaching moment.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
not in a like a weird after school special way, but like in a, hey, just like a quick, that wasn't the best way to say that. Do you possibly mean this? Or I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's another problem I had with how it was taught, just because I understand the idea behind like having all of these professors of different disciplines teach core, but when it turns out that if it ends up being that these professors aren't trained to handle these kinds of discussions, that just becomes an issue. And then that, especially, I'm not sure how the new core curriculum is now that there's no writing 50, but I believe they're adding more writing elements into core. So I don't know how that works either. Like, considering some of the professors teach completely different subjects, and I feel like it's really important um, to have the either have a training program, like, well, it's really important for the professors to be trained to kind of handle these kinds of discussions um, and be able to critically read this kind of writing. Um,
Anyone who did truth, would you be able to speak to that?
I mean, I didn't have to take writing 50, and I just got finished with like core 1 like literally last week. So
Yay!
I'm excited. I mean, I don't know. I just feel like personally, like my class like really focused on like race, and that's really the only thing like we ever really talked about. I mean, we read Mouse and Mouse 2, which are graphic novels. I'm not sure who the author is, but I think we only related it to the Holocaust, and that was pretty much it. And we didn't go into further how it relates to anything, or like how anti-Semitism still persists today. But the one book that like really, I don't know, was interesting to me was Citizen by Claudia Rankine, and how she wrote it while she was working at the Claremont colleges. And I think that could have been an opportunity where like we could have talked how like this type of behavior like still persists within Claremont. And it's not an opportunity, like, I don't know if other professors did, but like my professor personally didn't like talk about how it affects, I mean, the Scripps community. And I just thought that was interesting, just to like be thrown a book that like a professor wrote while she was teaching at one of the Claremont colleges, and like we weren't even talking about how this was affecting anyone, and we were just talking about the social context and like the historical context of it. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I mean, I'm Black, so I mean, I know the social consequences of everything that goes on, and I've experienced it. But I feel like I was forced more to think about just the writing, and not about, I had to separate writing and like my personal experience. And I never felt there was like a conversation within core where like everyone was able to share their personal experience and we learned from that. And I just feel like we were supposed to like analyze the text, then we were supposed to talk about what we were seeing, and that was it. Combine everything they were trying to do with social date.
yeah, and I think that kind of adds to just the culture of Scripps. And like, I feel like the Scripps student body oftentimes kind of has this sense of removal, like being removed from these social issues, and like not consistently addressing their own role in it. And I feel like core would have been a good opportunity to, like you said, to like to specifically discuss the role of these issues at Scripps.
Yeah, especially because I don't know if you guys who are coming into the discussion know, But there used to be 2 race and ethnic studies requirements and 2 feminist and gender studies requirements. And then they put, now we only have 1 because the other one went into core. Tony, you're making a face.
I just don't know that that was the smartest option, because there's a very different experience in taking an FGSS or like race and ethnic studies class that is focused on one thing with one professor and one group of people, so you can build a community and talk about it. Sorry, I said the word. I know. But you can have that group and that class character to talk about these issues rather than trying to gloss over a bunch of different ones. Like, I think that was kind of the difference between core 1 and core 2 for me. I don't know. My core 2 class was with Novi, so it was fantastic, but it was also kind of weird. But core 3, like, you had to focus in on one specific aspect, and you had your class and you could kind of develop a rapport with them, and you got to focus on one issue. And it's a similar experience, I think, in a lot of FGSS classes, is like you're talking about whatever the class is about for a whole semester, rather than spending a week on something different every time. But yeah, like, I get what they were doing with that, and they're like, oh, we can just talk about more FGSS stuff in core, it'll be fine. But it's not the same experience, and you don't get as much out of it, I think, unless you're like doing a deeper dive into a topic. And even if it's like an intro class, like I remember the class I took that was like, this is colonialism, and I was like, oh shit, colonialism, wow, I didn't realize. So, but I wouldn't have gotten that experience in core. I only got that after 3 months of talking